training. Has the mayor, maybe the mayor can answer, have you guys been through that de-escalation training? And is there any insight to trying to overhaul that or maybe look at it from a different angle? Because this seems to be a situation where it involves a de-escalation.
Yeah, so I will say this, de-escalation training has evolved over the years. I've been in contact as recently as this morning with the Police Executive Research Forum, who rolls out ICAT training. What it stands for eludes me at this time. But at the core of ICAT, again, is not only communications, but it's a critical decision-making model that a lot of departments have transitioned to, and incorporating that into their training, whether it's classroom-based or scenario-based training. I brought it with me and introduced it in my previous role as a chief of police, and it's something that I'm looking into bringing here. So it doesn't mean that we haven't had de-escalation training, but I think as the times change and the type of interactions that we're seeing and the types of calls that we're required to respond to in today's climate, we have to adapt our training along with that, and we will be doing that.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. And let's go now to Martin Pratt of Philly YBN.
Commissioner, it's been reported that the call that was received was a mental health call. Is that correct?
I can't confirm that. Either way, again, we're still backtracking to find out what the officers knew and what was dispatched to the officers at the time that they arrived on scene.
Second question, if someone is experiencing or family members are experiencing family members who are having a mental health issue, what would you suggest the call to 911 contain so that that does not happen?
We ask for, and then there's training components to this, right? So we have asked of the community and what they share and relate to the dispatcher, but we also have to take a look back and see what our dispatchers are asking when folks call, because when folks call, they may be in crisis or they're experiencing a critical incident and they might not be able to spout out that information. So we have to rethink the types of questions that we ask as well. But to answer your question, I think it's important to just give a full history in layperson speak, what's going on, if there are any weapons involved, if there's a history of the involved person trying to hurt themselves or others, layout of the house. Typically, we like for folks to come outside of the residence or
the Navy pilot as well,
if possible. But again, as much detail as possible. If typically they've been violent in the past, or they haven't been violent in the past ever, but today they are. As much information that we have to help us determine our response while we're en route there is extremely helpful. And we, on our end, again, I think we released that at the end of September during the day, because it's a pilot program. We now have a behavioral health specialist in our radio room, but only working limited hours. This person was not working at the time this call came out, but this person will assist us. And as this program grows, this person will assist us with triaging calls to determine the most appropriate response, whether or not a police response is most important, or maybe even a co-response with other providers are appropriate. But these are certainly things that we're paying attention to now.
So there's nobody mobile that goes out with?
Not through the police department, no.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Martin. Let's go to Laura McChrystal of the Inquirer.
Hi there. My first question for the police commissioner, had either of the officers who fired at Walter Wallace ever responded to a call for service at his house before, whether it be that same day yesterday or a previous day?
I don't know if those officers have. I'm not prepared to answer that right now.
Okay. And my second question, we have heard National Guard members saying that they are being called up or deployed in some way in the city. I am a bit unclear on whether that might be for an election-related response or for protests related to yesterday's shooting. Is there anything you can tell us on National Guard movement in the city?
Yeah, The mayor can chime in if need be, but like I said, we have put out a request for mutual aid. And when we called for a National Guard in the past, the request was to assist us with security of critical infrastructures, and also among the commercial corridors that we'd seen historically meaning in the last few months, where there had been looting and or rioting. So we are exploring all of our options at this time to do everything that we can to ensure that all of our PPD resources are focused on what's in front of us, whether it's the actual civil unrest or even, again, the crime that continues to occur throughout the city, the shootings and the homicides. So we can focus on calls for service and directly dealing with community, and then allowing for mutual aid resources, again, to be a highly visible presence in these areas, understanding that we cannot be in all places at one time.
And it's my understanding that the conversations with the governor about the National Guard have been based mostly in the election. This incident is a tragic incident that happened yesterday. So those conversations were ongoing relative to the election and the potential fallout from that.
And I think we need to be realistic in that, just given the proximity in time, that there may be some bleeding together, just given the timeline as far as how close we are to Election Day and the days after.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Let's go to Jack Tomczuk of Metro.
Hello. Yes, this is for Commissioner Outlaw. There was a video release, and there's been a lot of speculation on that, and about the distance between the officers and Walter Wallace. You probably can't speak specifically to this instance, but what is the distance where someone poses immediate threat if they're not armed with a gun?
It depends. And I want to be very clear in that, the law does not allow us to utilize hindsight, but it really is about what the involved officer perceived, experienced, what they were thinking at the time they made the decision to use force. And then any subsequent investigation looks at whether or not, looks at totality of circumstances, but also determines whether or not the force used was proportionate and was reasonable and necessary.
Okay, and is there any information you can provide about how many shots were fired or how many bullet wounds that Mr. Wallace suffered?
Chief Van, you want to address that?
Yeah, we know each officer fired approximately 7 rounds, but that's all we know. We don't know how many hit the individual or not. That's all being part of the active investigation. But we processed that many rounds at the scene, and we're still reviewing all the evidence.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jack. Let's go now to Mark Morales of CNN. Mark, you'll have to unmute yourself, please.
Hi, everybody. Just unmuted. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Hi there. So I wanted to know specifics about the incident as it happened. Approximately what was that distance that Mr. Wallace was from the police? What type of knife did he have? And at what point did he actually, excuse me one second. I'm sorry about that. And at any point did he actually lunge at the officers, or was it that he was ignoring commands?
Chief.
Yeah, like I said, the details of the investigation at this time are being gathered by the Officer Involved Shooting Investigative Unit, along with the Special Investigations Unit of the District Attorney's Office. And we're going to present all that evidence to them. As far as the distance and how that's measured by our crime scene unit, I don't have the answers to exactly the location where he was and they were at that exact moment in time. All of them details, like the commissioner said, this happened less than 24 hours ago, so are still being put together, and we're going to present them to the DA so that they can make the best decisions as the case moves forward.
Mark, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to get a little bit more clarification as to, anything you could say as to what prompted the officers to open fire. Was there did Mr. Wallace say anything? Were there any commands that he didn't listen to? Like, what was it that exactly made them pull the trigger?
I know that information would be helpful, but having not even interviewed the officers yet, we're in no position to be able to answer that question. And anything at this point would be short-sighted and speculatory.
All right, thank you, Mark. Let's go now to Jeff Cole of Fox 29.
Yeah, question to start with Commissioner Outlaw. Commissioner Outlaw, was there a supervisor sent along with what appear to be two young officers without tasers when they came to this call? And is that protocol?
I think it's a good question. We do know that a supervisor arrived on scene shortly thereafter. But again, I do not know timeline-wise whether or not a supervisor either self-initiated and was en route or was dispatched because of that.
Is it required for a supervisor to go when there's a call for a man with a weapon? I think this did include some sort of warning that this man had a weapon. Was the supervisor supposed to be along with him?
I do not believe, and again, do not quote me on this, I do not believe that there is a directive codified in writing that it's a requirement for a supervisor to respond, because we get so many calls like that. However, moving forward, if this is something that does need to be codified and strengthened in our directives, it will be. And making sure, again, that a supervisor is not only en route, but a supervisor is available with additional alternatives to alternative response and for coordination of the scene upon arrival.
Last question, Commissioner. It does appear that the man's mother is urging officers not to shoot him, not to shoot him. Are officers asked to take that into account if they're hearing that from a family member or someone in the scene who may know him?
You know, I will say this, we're all human beings, right? And again, when we train, we're talking about totality of the circumstance. That could very well be present. It could be family members or others pleading. You know, I don't want to Monday morning quarterback, because it ultimately all rests upon what the officers experienced at the time that they made the decision to shoot. Different officers, you know, handle scenarios different, right? They might have approached it differently. It doesn't necessarily mean that because of that, what the officers did were improper, but, you know, levels of experience and perspective, you know, lends to how we respond.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jeff Cole. Let's go to Ryan Briggs of WHYY Plan Philly.
Thanks. Can you guys hear me?
You got it. Go ahead.
So, Commissioner, just speaking generally, I wanted to get a better sense, you know, on a given night in a district like this, how many crisis intervention team officers or officers who were trained in that, you know, type of procedure, how many would be on call? And does the department have an issue providing enough crisis intervention officers, you know, just on a day-to-day basis? Does anything like that figure in here?
It does figure in. I don't have the answer for you. We'll have to circle back with you on that to get the exact number, but it absolutely figures in, because again, when we're talking about tools in the tool belt, we want to make sure that, you know, if it's by division or a certain region of the city, if we know that we have a higher level of certain types of calls, we want to make sure that how we deploy the resources that we have available in that respective area aligns with that. So obviously, this is something that we will be considering. The DA's office, when they do their investigation, they're looking at it from a criminal perspective to determine if any laws were broken. But in our administrative investigation, we're not only looking at the shooting itself, but we're looking at what led up to the shooting and the incidents around that, up to and including any risk management issues, if there are any policy changes that need to be made, or any training points or areas of training that need immediate attention. So it's far more comprehensive, and the question that you just asked is a part of that evaluation as well.
Does the department's 911 dispatch have the technology or ability to even flag a call that might have a behavioral health component, or direct particular 911 calls to, say, a crisis intervention team?
Yes.
It does have the ability to do that.
You know, I think it goes back to the original question of, you know, the type of information that we get, and are we asking questions to get us the answers that we need as it relates to that. If we get a call about a person with a weapon and no further details are attached with that, we go into it thinking that it's a person with a weapon. And oftentimes when we're dispatched to calls, we don't have the full picture until we get there. So it goes back to the original point about asking probing questions and getting as much info on the front end as we can. If in the event we don't have a lot of details, that's where CIT training or other alternatives to how we communicate come into play that allow us to slow the situation down, if possible, to get additional information there and be more thoughtful about our responses.
And what's the status of the behavioral health program that the department announced last month, I believe? Is that proceeding? Is there any change, or reconsideration given, what happened here, may have happened here in terms of moving along that process?
So we are in talks with the city. We, at this time, do not have a behavioral health program. There are other, through other city entities, behavioral health resources through behavioral health. And we are currently evaluating how we can bring our programs together so we can figure out, hey, do we do a co-responder model or do we not respond at all? All of these things have been underway, but really got some momentum in the last several months. And we're working with the city to determine just really the types of calls that we should be responding to, and if we do, how.
All right, thank you, Brian. Let's go now to Claudia Lauer, the Associated Press.
Hey, thank you for taking questions. Earlier when you said a number of officers don't have tasers, is there any information or numbers that you can share with how many officers or what percentage of officers do or do not have them?
Yeah, Claudia, I'll have to get back to you with that number. I'll have our folks circle back with the exact information.
Okay, and then, I know in the last couple of months, there have been a lot of changes, reforms that have been put in place in terms of use of force. In an ideal, and again, I know you can't talk about the specifics of this situation until the investigation is over, but in an ideal situation, what would have been the steps that should have been taken before use of force?
So again, I'm not going to Monday morning quarterback what happened here. And I know it's very easy by me saying, here's what would have, could have, should have done, could easily be attributed to last night. And I don't want to do that. But again,
the police at one point
we will be looking at what happened, what led up to force, when any force is used, what led up to the use of force, how much information did we have when the force was used? Was it proportionate to what the officers were perceiving or experiencing at that time? At what point was the force ceased or de-escalated once the threat was either declining or neutralized or no longer present, I should say? What are the other factors there? What are there other community members involved? What's the terrain? What's the environment like? Are you in an open area? Are you inside of a residence? Are you in a small room? There are a lot of factors there, including of the perceived threat. Does that perceived threat have the ability, the intent, the means, and the opportunity to do harm to the officers or others? So again, there's a lot of factors that are taken into account in a very short period of time. And that's what these assessments or these investigations will reveal in the long run. Hopefully in the short term, I would say, not the long run.
All right, thank you, Claudia. Let's go now to Alicia Reed of CBS 3.
Hi, this is for Mayor Kenney. With the number of pharmacies and ATMs that were robbed overnight, and also the stores boarding up today and closing early in an abundance of caution because a lot of them feel there's going to be more of the same tonight. Can you speak to these crimes of opportunity and how that will affect the city in the long term?
Well, we're hoping that we won't have any repeat of what we've seen last night, and we're taking every precaution that we can to be staffed and police manned to avoid that situation that happened last night. We've been through a very difficult time. We recognize that. The end of May, beginning of June was extremely difficult. And I will also say that looting is not protest, and vandalism is not protest. So these are not peaceful protesters. There were a lot of peaceful protesters out there last night, and perhaps over the next week or two. But vandalism and looting is not an acceptable form of First Amendment expression. And we will continue to staff and man our business strips, our strip malls, and our downtown and the stores in the neighborhood to the best of our ability and make sure that we avoid this again.
And Acting Commerce Director Sylvia Gaillard Howard is with us. So I don't know if you had any thoughts you wanted to add on that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that we have not been asking businesses to close, although we do know that some businesses have gotten in touch with us and told us that they're choosing to do so voluntarily, which is totally up to them. We are certainly, we understand businesses are very anxious right now. They already were anxious about the elections prior to this week and the incident that took place. So we are encouraging to be prepared, to have anything like flower pots or any kind of movable furniture, be ready to take that in and have it really easily accessible to move or not have it outside if possible.
Thanks. Alicia, did you have another question or are you good?
No, that was it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's go now to Emily Cordero of Univision. And Emily, Armando is still with us, I believe, and if you need translation.
Yes, hi, thank you for having us. Yeah, going back to the events that led up to the shooting death of Mr. Wallace, can you guys tell us who made that mental health call to 911 and what was exactly said? Was Mr. Wallace exhibiting some type of erratic behavior? Was he waving this weapon in front of family members or neighbors? Can we get a quick sense of what happened before with that 911 call?
Chief?
We're going to start with Armando.
Yes.
Emily, ¿quieres que tu pregunta sea traducida para tu audiencia de habla hispana?
Sí, ¿quién fue que llamó al 911 para reportar este incidente en la ciudad de Filadelfia? El señor Mr. Wallace estaba con un cuchillo en las afueras de su residencia de vecinos. ¿Qué fue lo que ocurrió en esta llamada? ¿Quién llamó?
The question is who called 911 and whether Mr. Wallace was wielding a knife outside of his home. And earlier she said, was he making threats or exhibiting erratic behavior?
That's all I could tell you very generally, because this is what I have in a summary. The details to this are being reviewed as part of the investigation. Is we've received a radio call for a person screaming and that person was armed with a knife. Who made that call and exactly how many of those calls that we've received, I don't have the details to that yet. And I said that's going to be reviewed. All those calls are recorded. We could review them by listening to them. We also will get a warrant and figure out who the subscriber was so we could formally interview them. And all that's still in process. So we did receive a radio call, but that's all I have in general summary of what the officers had arriving there.
Solamente puedo proporcionarte un resumen muy general de los detalles. Sabemos que se hizo una llamada telefónica sobre una persona que estaba gritando y que portaba un cuchillo. ¿Quién hizo la llamada? ¿Cuántas veces se llamó? Realmente no lo sabemos en este momento. Esto es algo que se va a revisar y se está revisando en cuanto a las grabaciones existentes a las cuales estamos escuchando. También vamos a pedir una orden para poder ver esto en mayor detalle y entrevistar a la persona, y esto está en proceso. Compartiremos mayor información según la tengamos.
Muchas gracias. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Emily. Just to note that we only have a few more minutes left, and so we're going to end questioning with those whose hands are currently raised. Let's go next to Yaima Crespo of Telemundo.
Sí, mi pregunta es para Outlaw. ¿Qué tipo de entrenamiento se le está dando a la policía de Filadelfia en casos de que una persona que se reporte con algún tipo de problema mental, pues se asista de una mejor manera y no se llegue a los disparos?
The question is for Commissioner Outlaw. What type of training is the police department in Philadelphia receiving for dealing with cases where there's reports of persons exhibiting mental health conditions so that this has better outcomes?
Thank you for the question. So I think, again, Chief Venor shared the details that came out of the call. Again, like I said, we tend to find out more once we get there. But as it relates to someone in crisis or experiencing, it could be crisis or someone under the influence, or they may have mental disabilities. And sometimes it's very difficult to discern between that upon our arrival. We provide crisis intervention training to our officers to ensure that there is a focus not only on de-escalation, but slowing things down if situations allow for that, to slow things down, to create time and distance, to establish lines of communication, whether it's with those who are trusted, who are already on scene. And again, in an effort to contain and create distance and space, to find out as much as we can in an effort to communicate and find alternative resolutions. This is ongoing training that we do roll out, but as I mentioned before, there's always room. We are a learning organization. There is always room to enhance or improve our critical decision-making models and any training associated with that. Because again, this training is not only helpful for dealing with someone in crisis, but there's a strong focus and emphasis on interpersonal skills to slow situations down when possible. With that said, we may, having all these amazing tools available to us, we may find ourselves in situations where it escalates rather quickly and we don't have the necessary time to go through all of those steps.
Bien, quiero básicamente agradecerte por la pregunta. Como ya lo dijo el Chief Lenore, nosotros tenemos en estos momentos el estudio de esta llamada para poder exactamente qué es lo que sucedió, que vamos a averiguarlo luego. Pero cuando alguien está en crisis o se encuentra bajo la influencia de sustancias o tiene incapacidades de salud mental, es difícil discernir en esos momentos qué es lo que se está sucediendo. Y damos capacitación en cuanto a intervención en situaciones de crisis para deescalar la tensión y para poder bajarle la velocidad a las cosas y manejarlas de una mejor manera, establecer una distancia en tiempo y en espacio. También tratamos de encontrar personas en quien se pueda confiar, que estén ya presentes en la escena de los incidentes para contener esto, para poner, como dije, mayor tiempo y distancia. Pero tratamos también de encontrar alternativas para resolver los casos de una forma continua. Hay capacitación que comprende, mejor dicho, el aprendizaje, la mejora y el avance de las situaciones en el momento de la toma de decisiones, que es algo que es útil en situaciones de crisis. Pero nuevamente, el desarrollo de las capacidades interpersonales como una herramienta para tratar de escalar una situación se tiene que aplicar rápidamente. Nosotros vamos a seguir aprendiendo de ello e incorporando esto a la capacitación que se les da a los oficiales de policía.
Emma, are you all set?
Thank you.
Very good. All right, we're going to go next to Kennedy Rose. After that, Dan Patrick and Michaela Winbe, and then we'll wrap. So Kennedy Rose of the Philadelphia Business Journal, you're up.
Hi, my first question is for Sylvie from the Commerce Department. I was wondering, in addition to the recommendations of asking businesses to bring large flower pots or outdoor furniture indoors, is the city doing anything else to help businesses affected or that could be affected by looters or damage?
Yeah, thanks, Kennedy. So at this point, we are in touch with all of our partners that have boots on the ground, like our CDCs, our business improvement districts, to assess the damage. And I will say there is damage certainly beyond 52nd Street, at least on at least, I know of at least 8, 9 other corridors that have been impacted, if not more. So, at this point, we're really just advising that precautions be taken, and we'll sort of see what we can do moving forward. But at this point, we're really just in direct communication with the businesses about those precautions.
Okay, thanks very much. And my second question is.
Kennedy, I apologize. I accidentally muted you there. If you could unmute yourself and then.
No worries. My second question was for Commissioner Outlaw. I was wondering which commercial corridors will have increased patrols, and I was wondering how does PPD determine that?
So we can push something out a little bit later with additional details. I will tell you the commercial corridors that we will be focusing on are the ones where we had some issues at the end of May, early June. Specifically for tonight, There will be a lot of concentration on the areas where we know there are planned events and there's potential for pop-up protests, which is back in the West Philadelphia area around that 52nd corridor and around the 18th Police District. But again, given that we know, I keep saying historically, but it was just a few months ago, that there was some unrest, there were vandalisms scattered throughout the city, including Center City. We will be diligent in ensuring that there are resources in those areas that were victimized before.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Kennedy. Let's go to Dan Patrick of 6ABC.
Hi, my first question is for the Commissioner. Regarding the people that were arrested, do you have demographics on them? We're hearing word that they may not be from that neighborhood. A lot of leaders in that neighborhood are telling us they are doers from somewhere else, as if they use this opportunity to go cause civil unrest. Do you guys see anything in terms of that?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. We'll have to circle back with you on that as far as their residences or where they're from. But that was our general sense. Speaking anecdotally, we tend to not like to speak anecdotally, but I will tell you that the crowd that were out there on the scene, the residents from that neighborhood, those who witnessed the incident, those were the folks that I interacted with while there. Those were not the same people that we later interacted with later on. Once I left that scene, it was a completely different group of folks and, quite frankly, demographics that we saw there. And I heard from communities some of the same frustrations expressed as well.
Okay. And my other question is for Mayor Kenney. Chad Wolf, the acting secretary of DHS, has said he's offered support for the city to drastically stop this again. What are your thoughts and response to that?
I'm not aware of any support. I did read something that the president was going to monitor, quote unquote, the situation. We've been dealing with Governor Wolf for additional assets, and we always deal with our federal partners in law enforcement at the FBI, at ATF, and the like, in the marshal's office. So we have an ongoing relationship with them. They help us process evidence. They help us with many different things when it comes to intelligence and the like. So we have a great relationship. Our commissioner and the command staff have a great relationship with the local federal authorities, and we'll continue to do that. President's welcome to monitor anything he likes, and we'll continue to deal with Governor Wolf for additional assets if we need them.
All right, thank you, Mr. And finally today, Michaela Winbe of Billy Penn.
Hey everyone, quick question for Commissioner Outlaw. Does the department have a civil unrest plan? And if it does, what time last night was it put into action to respond to protests or looting?
Yes, so this completely caught us off guard in the sense that, one, no one can predict that there is an officer-involved shooting. And two, once we arrived there, we saw that there would be civil unrest because it was beginning to unfold upon our arrival there. Once that happened, we immediately began to put resources in place, ensuring that there was a request made to open the EOC where I am now, extending shifts, canceling days off, pressing the button for mutual aid, having conversation with other stakeholders in city administration to ensure that all of perspectives were being met. And that's where we are now. So the answer is yes, there is a plan. It just so happens, again, we're also planning for any pre, during, and post unrest that may occur as it relates to elections. So a lot of key people are already available and at the table. That's where we are now. So yes, there are plans, and we continue to build as things unfold. But I want to be very clear in that what happened yesterday afternoon, well into last night and into the morning, none of which was planned.
Sure. So do you recall what time it was that the plan was put into action?
We immediately began to mobilize our resources upon our arrival to the scene of the officer-involved shooting, seeing that there were a lot of angry residents there. There were a lot of voices that needed to be heard. And generally our first step, aside from the containing the area, would be to call our civil affairs unit. And that's what happened almost immediately. and we went from there. So early afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
Or early evening, I should say. You're welcome.
Sure, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Outlaw and others. We will advise if future avails are planned on this topic. Otherwise, please send any questions or requests